given the importance of the individual leader of Assad, is there anything that you believe that we, the United States and the coalition, could do and should do, would be in our interest to do, that would affect his calculus and actually bring him to the sort of negotiations that Dr. Cronin was describing? I think the kinds of efforts, the train and equip at this late stage, the type of time that would take, the type of fruits that would be, it's hard to kind of close the gap between seeing, you know, the kinds of impact that would actually affect Assad's calculus. What brings Assad to the table for a negotiated solution? And is that something that we can and should stomach? Is it actually in our interest to go to do whatever that thing is?
I can imagine a variety of things that would affect his calculation. One would be if we launched heavy airstrikes on his military targets. That'll affect his calculation instantly. But the problem with that is, then what? Then what? And this is kind of Iraq all over again. So to me, it makes more sense to sort of understand this is going to be a long conflict, Michelle. There is no fast answer. I do agree we need to talk to the Iranians, but talking to them and actually working with them is a different thing. If we could convince the Iranians to do what they did in Iraq and drop Iranian support for Maliki, it wasn't just American support, it was also Iranian support. The Iranians eventually did drop their support for Maliki. But why did they do that? And I think if the Iranians withdrew their support from Bashar al-Assad, even if Bashar doesn't agree to come to the table, the people around him will agree to come to the table. That's how dependent they are on Iran and those Shia fighters that they organized to go to fight in Syria. So what would affect the Iranian calculation? Well, I think there's two things. One, what we saw in Iraq was that as the military situation turned frighteningly bad for Nouri al-Maliki, they began to get more flexible. So again, it gets into this question of how do you change the balance on the ground, aiming not for victory, but aiming for negotiation. And then the second is that there needs to be a viable alternative. Haider al-Abadi's name came out of something that we did do well in Iraq, is we actually created a parliament where they have real live parliamentary discussions. They're not perfect, but it works. Haider al-Abadi's name came out of that process. We don't have a process like that in Syria. There is no parliament that would play that role. But I think any assistance we give to change the balance on the ground, Michelle, has to be coupled, and I mean this in a very stern conditionality, that opposition fighters we help must open discussions with the disaffected Alawi community in Syria. You know, there were demonstrations yesterday against Assad in his own heartland, and the police had to fire. It's the first time they've ever done that. The Alawis are tired too, and they want an end game. So we need to get Syrians talking to Syrians about the end game. We tried in Geneva. We got laughed out. The regime said, forget it. We can't go back to Geneva. We're going to have to find another way to get Syrians talking to Syrians.